Today, I am going to talk about a medication that a lot of people do not like, and most people with diabetes should probably try to avoid whenever possible, but sometimes it is just not possible to avoid it. So you gotta know how to deal with it. And that would be corticosteroids. Oral version would be prednisone. Injectable would be like a cortisone shot. And so a prime example, and one reason why you may need this would be, welcome to the Your Diabetes Insider podcast, where we take all of the mysteries of blood sugar control, focusing on nutrition, exercise, and any of the other 40 plus factors that may impact your blood sugar. If you don't know me, my name is Ben Zeal. I'm a registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, strength and conditioning coach, and I've lived myself with type 1 diabetes for over 20 years. And I am here to share everything that I have learned in both my personal and professional experience so you can live that incredible diabetes life. So get ready and let's dive right into today's episode. What is going on? Welcome to this episode of the Your Diabetes Insider podcast. And today I am going to talk about a medication that a lot of people do not like, and most people with diabetes should probably try to avoid whenever possible, but sometimes it is just not possible to avoid it. So you gotta know how to deal with it. And that would be corticosteroids. Oral version would be prednisone. Injectable would be like a cortisone shot. And so a prime example, and one reason why you may need this would be a situation if there's particularly an injury where there's pain. An orthopedic doctor may say, hey, you need a cortisone injection. Another example would be, I can even give one from my own life. I have a bunch of sinus issues, and there's times where there's nasal polyps, and unfortunately, they prevent me from fully being able to breathe properly, which is no bueno. Long story, but I won't get into all of it. But the moral of the story is prednisone can help with, in my case, flattening some of those nasal polyps so I can breathe a little bit better. And maybe it's temporary, maybe it's not, but regardless, the reason I mentioned that people do not like corticosteroids and prednisone as people living with diabetes is because it can just decimate your blood sugar. And so prime example of this, so I could even tell you recently, so I was on a dose pack. So that's basically, it's not even a huge dose of prednisone, but it's a decent amount. And you ultimately taper. You start out at a pretty big dose, big is all relative, but at a pretty solid dose, and then you taper your way all the way down. So in my case, ideally it hits it really hard and then it starts to get a little bit easier and easier. On the flip side of the cortisone injection, it's likely going to hit you a lot sooner because it's one dose and it can stick around for days. But what ended up happening was, so the first day that I had the prednisone, so it was the biggest dose for the day, I didn't really notice anything crazy. I took my first dose, took the second dose, took the third dose, all spread out throughout the day. I didn't notice much until the evening. And then when I noticed it, it felt like I was hit by a cement mixer. So I had all the symptoms of high blood sugar. So I'm talking, for me personally, when it's a really nasty high and it's way higher than I'm used to, my muscles start to cramp. I start to feel super gross, almost nauseous-like, and I just get that sense of thirst and I get real out of it. And so all of those things all just hit me like an oncoming train. And I realized, oh God, this is probably the prednisone. And I actually was prepared for it with some stuff that I will share with you in just a minute. But in this particular case, once it hit, my insulin resistance was so bad, I had 30 grams of carbs at dinner and I dosed extra, which again, I'll get into in a second. My blood sugar hit 320. And that was relatively tame compared to some people I know and some patients that we've had that have gotten a cortisone shot and end up with blood sugars in the 400-500 range. And I also remember vividly being in undergrad and I was playing baseball and my elbow was getting messed up and my elbow ended up taking me out of playing baseball. Like that was just the end of it. But the doctor had said, hey, let's give you a cortisone injection. And I was like, absolutely not. Like there's no way that I'm getting a cortisone injection because of the diabetes. And actually it wasn't a doctor. It was a PA that was in there at first and the doc was going to come in after. And I vehemently refused. And he and I beefed it out. We went back and forth for a good solid 5 minutes. And he thought I was full of it. He went to the doctor and brings the doctor in. He's like, this patient's saying that he won't take a cortisone injection and blah, blah, blah. And the doctor's like, why won't you? I'm like, because I have type 1 diabetes. And the doctor looked at this PA and just ripped him a new one because of how dramatic the blood sugar impact can be. And so with that, you heard that I hit 320 and I felt like garbage. So what ends up happening a lot of times is with these corticosteroids, they do a couple of things. Number one, they can break protein down into glucose, which similarly, protein, if you eat enough of it or you eat it without carbs, can break down to glucose. We've talked about that on the podcast before through a process called gluconeogenesis, which it happens. It's annoying. Your blood sugar can go up, but it's not super crazy. In this case, though, it's doing it at a very accelerated pace and just all at like kaboom, all at one time. And then in addition, it's inducing insulin resistance. So it is not a great situation. Think about corticosteroid, cortisol, very similar in terms of mechanism, very similar in terms of what they do. And so then once your blood sugar's up, you are up. So you could be doing everything right. Like I said, the other day when I was on it and I hit 320, it took me a long time to come down. Like I'm talking, I had to correct and override. And it's difficult because you can do all the things that would traditionally work for a high blood sugar, but those may not even be enough. So you have to be ready, number one, with a plan with your care team. I want to just kind of prime you and give you an idea of what it may take for you to be successful in a situation where you're on prednisone or a corticosteroid or something has to be involved in your life that you don't want to deal with, but you have to keep your blood sugars in range. Because think about it, right? The whole point of taking something like this is to help your body heal, whether it's an orthopedic injury, whether it's an elbow, whether it's a shoulder, whether it's hey, you have something going on in your sinuses and we have to clear it out, right? But the moral of the story is you have to heal. And the best way for your body to heal is for your blood sugar to be in range. And then this particular class of meds will push you out of range, which then makes it harder to heal. So it kind of seems backwards, but bear with me. We can definitely make it happen. It's annoying, but you can thrive. You can make it through. And ideally, this is not a long-term kind of thing. It's something that might be, if it's again, an injection, it might be 2, 3, 4, 5 days. If it's, a dose pack, you only take the dose pack for 6 days, of which the first half tends to be worse. And then if it's a larger dose, of course, you may have to really go in depth with your care team. You're going to have to regardless. But couple things that I have seen that have worked for me personally and also with patients in general, right? So first thing first, you're going to need more insulin. You're going to be insulin resistant and more resistant than you may have ever been in your life. And you just have to accept that and be okay with that because there's really no other way around it. Like for example, that first day, once I got hit like a ton of bricks, my override was up around 75%. So I put it on my loop, right? I'm using the loop. I put in override, so basal, bolus, correction, everything up 75%, not an exaggeration. And the irony is that's relatively low. And that's probably because I'm on an oral dose pack or, at the time I was. There are people when they get injections. I knew of a patient that got an injection in her hand and she had to do 2.5 times her insulin. So I'm not telling you that there's a specific number that you need to be looking for. What I am telling you is you are going to be very insulin resistant, more than you may have seen in a long time. And you are going to have a plan with your care team to increase everything across the board. Again, it's temporary, but we have to be able to have you stay in range. So that is going to be the first thing. I had to get up to 175%. Again, for me, fortunately, it's a taper down. But if you're someone getting an injection, you're someone on a much higher dose, you may have to be on a higher, override. And that is okay. But accepting that and understanding that is going to be part of what keeps you going. Because, oh my goodness, I'm taking so much more insulin than normal. It happens. It's part of the game, for better or for worse. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, and this is something I would definitely suggest, and it's not permanent, I would consider decreasing your carbs. And you might be thinking, well, I have a lot of carbs or I like carbs. Right. But I'm just talking for a few days, especially the first 2, 3 days after whenever the, highest dose is administered. Because again, like I mentioned, that was 30 grams of carbs that pushed my number up to 320. And I dosed on time, everything else is on point, right? And I like to think I'm educated, right? I've got 25 plus years of personal diabetes experience. I work in the field. I like to think I know what I'm doing and I still hit 320. Now imagine you're not exactly totally sure what's going on. You go eat a bowl of pasta, it may not end well. And the last thing you want is having the nasty high blood sugar symptoms and then potentially putting yourself at potential risk of DKA or something else, God forbid, that could be really bad. So I would suggest just for those first few days, try to decrease carbs. I'm not saying don't eat any carbs, but to make your life a little bit simpler, maybe try to cap your carbs. Again, your personal limit determined with your care team, but break it down. Maybe it's half, maybe it's, 70% of your norm, maybe it's 30% of your norm, but try to decrease that because remember, carbs are going to be the thing that's going to make you skyrocket the most. And if you already have something that in the evening time, it seems to work for whatever reason, at least from what I've seen in my experience, you're fine during the day, then 6 p.m. hits and suddenly it just takes on a new life all through overnight, which is terrible. You're going to have to make sure that you are considering decreasing carbs because you're already going to be dosing more anyway. Another thing, hydrate. Of course, you're thinking high blood sugar. Of course, hydrate. Yes, but preemptively in this case, because remember, you could be eating no carbs. You could be eating minimal anything and your blood sugar still rises into the 200s and just sits there. So you're going to want to make sure you're hydrated in advance, electrolytes as well, but really focusing on that hydration to make sure you are not in a position where things could go poorly later on because you were not prepared. And those high blood sugar symptoms are going to suck regardless, but they're going to suck a lot less if you are hydrated. And then the other big thing that you have to remind yourself during this time is to not beat yourself up if your number does go higher. It's tough to be mentally resilient during a time like this. It's very tough because you're taking way more insulin than normal. You could be taking, 75% more like I was, right? You could be taking double. You could be taking triple depending on who you are. But you have to remind yourself, this is not a permanent thing. This is just for right now to help me get better, to help me keep my numbers in range, to stay in range. And if you're thinking, oh my God, well, the insulin, weight gain, if you're not eating a calorie surplus, you have nothing to worry about. I had a lot of sinus issues back in 2019. And I can tell you that during all those times, I was taking way more insulin than I normally would. And I did not gain any weight. In fact, because of how brutal it was at the time for me to breathe, I actually lost weight because there was so much energy for my body to breathe. So I'm not saying that will happen to you. I'm not saying ask for this. You don't want it, right? It's not something that you want to be taking. But in the case that you have to have it, understand, give yourself some grace. You're going to have some higher numbers than normal, potentially. Even if you're feeling, oh, I've got this pretty much nailed on lock, everything's great. You still want to make sure that you are paying attention. Don't get overconfident. Don't get overly cocky. Ideally, it's, 3 days, 4 days, and then you're back towards normal. And you're probably going to have to taper down, right? You're probably going to start up, hey, 75%, 100% extra, double, whatever it is, and then slowly work your way back down towards normal again. And I'm not going to say, increase your carbs as you decrease your override, but at the same time, you theoretically could focus on that. But not beating yourself up is going to be paramount. Not being freaking out over the insulin amount is going to be paramount. Understanding, hey, you still got to stay active. You still got to do the things that you need to do to keep your number in range is going to be absolutely tremendously helpful for you. Because if you're able to normally keep yourself in range, now you're on this medication, don't stop doing the things that work. That would just be goofy, right? Why would you do that if you're like, I know that typically getting X number of steps helps me and working out 4 days a week, so I'm just going to stop doing that unless you feel like absolute garbage. Different conversation. But if you feel fine and good enough to train. Your body will thank you. You don't need to destroy yourself, but do something to keep that insulin sensitivity boosted as best as humanly possible. And then the biggest thing, like I said, is not beating yourself up about it. It's not going to be the most fun experience, not going to be an amazing experience, but it's an experience that you will get through. If you're listening to this, you've survived 100% of your worst blood sugar days, right? Therefore, you will get through this time as well. This too will pass, but you have to just remember, hey, I'm going to do the stuff that I know works. You're going to go into it with an override. I'm going to go into it with a game plan from my care team. If you are not getting a concrete game plan from your care team before you start, you are setting yourself up to fail. That whole quote of those who plan to fail the plan, that whole quote, precisely in this situation. You are likely going to set yourself up for a lot more difficulty than you should if you choose to not plan. If you choose to just fly by the seat of your pants and, oh yeah, look, my number went up really high. I should probably take some more insulin. And then you don't even think about it. And you're like, okay, cool. Now I'm dosing and dosing and dosing. I'm not sleeping good. And then that impacts the insulin sensitivity and everything just starts to fall just down to pieces. Then you're exhausted. You don't want to work out. Then your insulin sensitivity takes a bigger dump. Then you're still running high. Then you end up eating food you probably, don't want to because you want convenience options. And you see how the cascade can start to happen very quickly and unravel. And it's not pretty. So do the best you can, plan it out, have a plan with your care team, know that your care team's got your back. If they don't, someone who has a care team that will understand what to help you with in this situation. My team and I all are dietitians, diabetes educators. We all live with type 1 ourselves. We all have exercise backgrounds and we're here to help you. So if you're like, my team's not helping me, talk to us. We got you. But the biggest thing is have a game plan. In the event you have to take some corticosteroids, it's not going to be fun. If you're on prednisone, it's not going to be fun, but it's ideally going to be a temporary situation. You'll have to make adjustments. If it's chronic prednisone for some reason, which I've had patients with that as well, you're going to have a longer term care plan, but ideally it's going to be a little less dramatic in terms of its impact on the blood sugar, because ideally it's a lower dose for a longer time frame versus a massive kaboom dose that's then getting tapered down. So recognize you will thrive, you will succeed. I believe in you. Just felt like an important topic to make sure I went through because I do periodically get people asking about this. I want to make sure that there is some sort of starting resource out there if you end up on prednisone or have a cortisone injection, etc. So with that, let me know if you enjoyed this episode. If you're loving the podcast, whether you're listening on Spotify or Apple, please drop us a 5-star review. It would mean the world to us. Share with a friend if you feel like this would be useful for them and they'd get some value out of it. And like I said before, if you need a care team that cares and also gets it because they live with diabetes themselves, my team and I are all dietitians. We all live with type 1. We all have exercise backgrounds and we're here to help support you. So holler at me on Instagram, on TikTok, at Man of Zeal, MANOFTZEL, and I will see you in the next episode.
Hope you're ready for the next episode. Hey.